Good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening, depending on your time zone. Thank you for joining today's discussion on digital transformation, digital public infrastructure, and the role of the private sector in advancing these efforts in developing country contexts. My name is Noam Unger. I am the Director of the Sustainable Development and Resilience Initiative here at CSIS, and I'm a Senior Fellow with the Project on Prosperity and Development. This discussion is the second in a series of conversations that we're trying to have on related issues around digital public infrastructure, what it is, probing it from different angles, whether it's new or a new frame applied to something that is not so new. We hosted the first event in September, which was a virtual event that happened soon after the G20 discussions that India had hosted, in which digital public infrastructure was quite a prominent theme that was elevated. Having the ability to unlock socioeconomic opportunities in low and middle income countries, DPI can be the foundation of a nation's digital transformation. And that's really what we're going to talk about, is different aspects of digital transformation. Essentially, DPI refers to large or population scale digital systems for better public service delivery. Good digital public infrastructure is the critical infrastructure that allows a connected approach, promoting interoperability and cross-cutting solutions that prioritize trust and safety and inclusion and accessibility. And as countries continue on their digital transformation journeys, investing in digital public infrastructure can be a crucial tool to improve the overall well-being and quality of life of their citizens. The foundations of digital public infrastructure systems include essentially internet and broadband accessibility, identification systems, payment systems, and also data exchange, so that there's an interoperability and trust and credibility with a lot of information that needs to work. And we'll get into some of the examples of what that looks like in practice. As we work towards reducing inequality through digital inclusion and toward accelerated progress against global goals in the face of really significant setbacks, working towards digital transformation that's strong and transparent and resilient is a real priority. So we're fortunate to host two wonderful leaders here with us today to discuss these issues. Each brings a unique perspective. Eno Ebong is the director of the U.S. Trade and Development Agency, or USTDA. And Director Ebong started her public service at USTDA and rose through the ranks as a career civil servant. She's played many different roles within the agency. I think it was as general counsel, as COO, as deputy director, now as director. It really means you're the right person in this role at the right time, and we're happy you're here with us. Her experience includes time in the nonprofit sector and practicing business and finance law at a law firm representing public and private companies on a wide range of issues. Karan Bhatia is the head of government affairs and public policy at Google. Prior to this, he served as the Deputy U.S. Trade Representative from 2005 to 2007 and as Assistant Secretary for Transportation for Aviation and International Affairs from 2003 to 2005. And Karan has also served as a Deputy Undersecretary for Commerce for Industry and Security. A real background both in public and private sector, and what a wonderful lens to bring to today's conversation, so we're happy to have you.
Thanks.
We had billed this as a conversation with another person, Agnes Dashevich from the Development Finance Corporation. She emailed me just last night and had a fever, and we just wish her the very best, and we'll bring her back for a future conversation. I'm going to turn to each of them so that they can provide some opening remarks, but I do want to mention for our viewers who are virtually joining us that there should be a button that you can click to ask questions and submit questions, and we will try to incorporate your questions as well as questions from our live audience when we get to that point in the conversation. All right, let me hand the microphone over. Director Ebong, welcome.
Thank you.
Please tell us a little bit more on these issues of digital transformation from your perspective.
Thank you so much, Noam. It really is a pleasure to be here with you and with Karan. It's really wonderful to have this discussion, particularly as I hear you mention many of the items and factors that we at USTDA take into account as we work in digital infrastructure and digital transformation as well. Things like coordination, collaboration, risk mitigation. These are all important concepts. But perhaps I'll start with just a brief summary of USTDA and who we are for those who don't know. We are, as we call it, the Overseas Project Preparation Agency of the US government. To go back a little bit in history, because I'll explain what that means, we were founded in 1992 through the Jobs Through Export Act with the mission to promote the participation of US private sector in infrastructure development projects, particularly in sectors where there is a strong likelihood of US exports. Back in '92, the sectors that were identified were transport, energy, telecommunications, which was what it was called at the time, and also the environment. Those sectors pretty much remain the same today. We focus on clean energy, climate, on transport, on what we term digital infrastructure, and also we've added over the last few years healthcare infrastructure. Our method of implementing our mission is to focus on the early project preparation for large-scale infrastructure projects. So we provide grant funds to overseas project sponsors in either the public or the private sector to conduct technical assistance, feasibility studies, pilots, the kind of planning that will unlock investment. So our participation for private sector is truly participation in bringing technology, solutions, and innovations to the projects that we support, hoping to unlock financing down the road. So we also have quite a long engagement in the digital space. From the 90s, actually, after the first, the conclusion of war in Afghanistan in the 90s, we were in there planning for the laying of fiber optic cable. Go forward to 2007, just as iPhones were being launched, we were doing some of the planning for the earliest submarine subsea cable projects in East and Southern Africa. I think our work has evolved because we understand that connectivity is key, but there has to be access for citizens to be able to use and engage. So what we have done then is focus on, as we do our work, the underlying infrastructure, last mile connectivity, because access is key, and also supporting projects that build platforms that provide citizens access, whether it is in e-government, whether it's in healthcare infrastructure. In terms of our work, just to give a few examples, we have been doing quite a bit in laying and planning for laying of subsea fiber optic cables in Southeast Asia and the Indo-Pacific. We have worked in last mile connectivity to answer the question of power source, so using renewable solar powered, for example, base stations to be able to provide towers and connectivity in places in sub-Saharan Africa. And we've done various platforms supporting projects everywhere from Latin America and the Caribbean throughout Asia and in Africa as well. I want to just mention, before I sort of close out my opening remarks, two additional items. One is, I think it will become clear we are a very project-based institution. But even in that context, it is possible to address issues of safety, of gender, making sure that projects are built. For example, our work in the Caribbean islands, where we're looking at technology to rebuild the national emergency systems in a place like Jamaica, which is really critical. or in a country like Guatemala, working to build projects that incorporate women-led, rural, solar-powered digital community centers. So I think it's important to note we might not have been using the terms that are developing, but there's a long history of work that I think can contribute and support these kinds of engagements. The last thing I'll say is that government does have a role in convening. And I think that the Biden-Harris administration has provided us all an important service in providing frameworks where we can partner, and not just amongst ourselves, but with partners and trusted allies on addressing some of these issues. So I think of the Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment. I think of the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. I also think of digital transformation with Africa. All of these in each of the, whether they're regionally based or broadly, have digital infrastructure as a key element and have as a key approach engaging the private sector and industry from the very beginning. And I think it's a promising way to really address some of these issues. And I'll close there because I really want to hear what Karan has to say.
Well, thank you so much, Enno. And Karan, then over to you from your perspective.
Well, no, first of all, thank you, and thanks CSIS for convening this quite timely discussion on a topic that's certainly near and dear to our hearts. And it is always a thrill to do anything with Enno. She has been such a leader in the government in this set of issues. And TDA, I say to her, I say it more broadly, is really one of my favorite U.S. government agencies. It is a jewel that most people don't know about, and we're debating whether that's a good thing or not. But I think it does some terrific work, and it's it's nimble, and it works at the speed of the private sector. So it really is a great organization. So look, Google is a company that, although it doesn't bill itself as such, perhaps as much as we should, I really think is almost created for the purpose of digital transformation of developing economies. And it really starts with our mission. Our mission is to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful. And that emphasis on universality really informs everything that we do. We are constantly investing in how to make our products more relevant and more impactful and more helpful to people around the world, and not just in the developed economies, but very much in the developing world and the emerging markets. Perhaps the most useful thing I can do in an introduction is give you a little bit of a sense of how we do that. Like, what is the framework by which we think about our activities, or which I think about our activities in the developing world. And I really do think about it in sort of three buckets. So the first is around products. It is Google. I think many of you probably know our most iconic products, things like search, maps. Those are products that we all use every day, but when you step back and think about it from a development perspective, the impact that tools like those YouTube, for instance, that they have on economies as they are working their way through a development curve is enormous. It is the ability to connect to information around the world. YouTube has effectively almost become sort of a supplementary educational system around the world. It is one of the leading ways, together with search, in which people get information to train themselves. The relevance of the Google suite of tools to how governments function is enormous. And what makes me particularly excited is how I think about the application of artificial intelligence to that new set of tools is really going to revolutionize things. So I'll just give you one example, which is a product known as Google Translate. Some of you may have used it as you travel around the world. So it's a product that was first innovated about 15 years ago. Google is 25 years old as a company, so relatively early on. And it started with a handful of languages. And slowly we added to the corpus so that you could get more and more languages in there. But it is painstaking work to do that. And so we were adding a few languages a year, a few languages a year. Last year alone, due to the application of artificial intelligence, we were able to go from 100 to 133 languages, adding in languages like Assamese, Quechua, languages that now are really connecting smaller, more underrepresented, underconnected groups into the global economy and the global, infrastructure of information. So it's just sort of a single example of how AI is already, but stands even more to revolutionize this. So anyway, the first way we think about our contribution to development is a digital transformation is through the continued expansion of our products in ways that are helpful and by the way, I would note free by virtue of the way we as a business, we operate on an ads-based business model. So people are accessing all of these tools for free. The second thing I would talk about is a whole variety of programs that we operate in markets around the world. And these programs work fundamentally to sort of build the skill set, the domains that people around the world need to be literate, engaged members of the digital economy. So we have a program, umbrella program called Grow with Google that works to train people of all ages, from children all the way up to seniors, to be part of that economy. Last year, if you took the sum total, we had trained up to 70 million people around the world on this set of tools, which is an extraordinarily important base for people to start operating in that digital economy. Now, many of us take it for granted, those of you in the room, certainly those of you watching remotely, that there's that ease of access into the digital economy. You know how to click on a Zoom link, or you know how to whip out your phone. But we've got to remember that there are still billions of people around the world today who don't have connectivity and don't have the skill set necessarily to connect that way. And so we consider this array of programs, and we have many subsidiary groups, some working with, as I say, children, some working with small businesses, some working with underrepresented groups. We have a large focus on trying to make sure that there's more gender equality in terms of access to the internet and technology. So that's a second bucket of things that we focus on. And then the third I would put broadly under the category of partnerships. It is very fundamental to sort of the way Google thinks about how to be effective around the world, is that we do it in partnership with local institutions. That can be academic institutions, that can be private sector institutions, and it can certainly include governments, and does include governments around the world. So we are working quite closely with governments in every continent, many regions around the world, in helping to build tools and the assets and resources that they need to be able to be successful in a digital world, and frankly, increasingly in an AI-enabled world. Again, that array of partnerships can be very broad. It can include things like digital public infrastructure, where we have been working, for instance, with the government of Ukraine very closely on building apps that bring governmental services to people in ways that, frankly, are revolutionary, and that we ourselves in the United States, I think, would be envious of that level of connectivity. It's quite interesting to see how emerging economies have been much faster to adopt some of these technologies. We've been working with the government of India on its payment system, for instance, that is also, I think, commonly cited as a significant achievement in this area. Another space where we have been partnering with governments is on, and I'll reference this as well, on the fundamental physical infrastructure. So subsea cables are really the avenues, the highways, the railroads of the contemporary digital economy. But they are extraordinarily expensive. You know, you are running these pipes across the Pacific, across the Atlantic. Interestingly, unlike almost all other forms of infrastructure historically that have been largely funded by the public sector, the taxpayer expense, these subsea cables that are now largely being funded and run by private sector companies, Google, you know, leading among them, are being done on our nickel, on our dime, but they are serving to bring connectivity to parts of the world in ways that heretofore were unimaginable. So we just announced, in combination with state visit by the Australian Prime Minister, for instance, a new Pacific Connect set of cables that are going to end up helping to connect the islands in the South Pacific that have historically been underconnected. We are very proud of our Equiano cable that was recently lit that connects sub-Saharan Africa to Europe, and in so doing is going to have a profound impact in the speed of connectivity, but also in the economic impact, the GDP multipliers that are going to come from that level of connectivity. So I'll stop there because just to give you a flavor, but you know, when we think about it, and maybe the last thing I will just say into partnerships, because I suspect we will get into it, is we are also often turned to by governments to ask about policy issues, public policy issues. How do we become a digitally enabled economy? And that's a space where we're also very proud to partner and work and share our thoughts with governments.
That's great. Well, thank you both for those introductory thoughts. We talk about digital transformation, and there are a lot of digital investments. And in many ways, I was recently, out in a separate project working on issues of blockchain and democracy, and debating even internally within our own institution the difference between digitization and digitalization. And the way I understand it is this is sort of like language in flux, but digitalization is really about leveraging the power and the value and the interoperability once you have digitized a bunch of things. So a society or a country or government can become digitalized. And you mentioned Ukraine, Karan. I mean, the government of Ukraine has a ministry of digital transformation. There are countries out there that are really, as you say, leapfrogging, adopting, jumping into this. But there is a difference between sort of just investing in a project that has to do with digitization and actually investing in something that is transformative. So when I ask you that and say, well, okay, how are you getting at the transformational part of digital transformation from your own perspectives? What jumps out at you? I mean, I know you were talking a little bit about PGII and Africa digital transformation. What is it that for you that you think that you're excited about, that you say, this is actually transformational? It's not just a sort of incremental sort of piece that we're pitching in. It's actually something that's going to transform the ability of this government, this country, to provide services to its people.
So from an agency like ours, from our perspective, I do think that the ability of the government to shine a light and to empower practices that will help to transform approaches in countries to digitization, I think is critical. So the ability to train authorities with respect to the importance of open, secure, healthy, interoperable, the sort of the very framework that is needed to make sure that as many people as possible can access I think that holds a lot of promise and could transform if it is carried through. I think the ability to really connect about the types of regulations and policies and the insights of a company like Google are critical to that. And again, if that can be deeply rooted and embedded, I think will make a difference. And I think that the ability from our perspective to lean in the way that we can to truly delimit the risk when it comes to nascent technologies, new technologies that may need to be tested when we're talking about emerging, for us, it's low and middle income economies. I think that, and an agency like ours can take that early risk. I think that also allows a possibility of true transformation. So I think that it's there are key elements to this, both in terms of things like policy, things like human capital development. And I always think it's extraordinary how much our private sector does in really opening the aperture for people to be able to participate. That what you mentioned about languages like Quechua and things, you don't think about it, but that opens the vista for so many people. So I think that being able to leverage, support, come in where we can to really transform the enabling environment will add to true transformation for digitalization and digital growth.
Karan, what does it make you
Well,
think?
first of all, just let me, this is going to be a recurring theme for me during this because I think TDA does such great work, but that focus on creating the right enabling environment is so important, and a space where I really do think, as we think about U.S. government agencies and how they can work in partnership with the private sector as sort of the laying the groundwork for some of this work. It's such a critical piece. I mean, no, it is like I'm having a hard time picking, because there's just so many things that right now technology stands to transform the way government services are provided and that intersection between government and the private sector. If I'm just going to name a few, education is just, it's revolutionary. And COVID, interestingly, I think people sort of look back at that period of time and it was a lost few years, and certainly was an extraordinarily painful and a very challenging period. But it was an absolute spur to technology adoption around the world in sectors that historically have been quite resistant or reluctant to change, and where we've for various reasons seen sort of slower adoption of technology.
Well, I think it was a wake-up call in some ways for some countries. You saw it was an instant laboratory. Some countries and governments were able to provide services to their people in new and different ways because of the digital infrastructure that they had invested in and the partnerships with the private sector that they had that enables that sort of digital ecosystem. And other countries completely failed in that regard.
And those that failed are now doubling down on trying to figure out how do they get there. And those that did it and experimented and found interesting solutions are now looking for how do we build this into the system. So the work that Google has been able to do with ministries of education around the world is really, I think, going to be transformative. Is it going to replace, is remote education, is online education going to replace traditional education? No, but it is an extremely powerful substitute. It's an enabler. It allows for more remote communities to get access to the same quality and type of education that people in more developed and densely populated places. So for just many reasons, I think education is a space that we're seeing a revolution happening there. Another place I would say is the way government owns, processes, secures its own data is changing dramatically. So one of the one of the Google products and suites of services that we're very excited about is our cloud services business, which is basically working with governments to both host, but also give them insights into their data, through the application of analytical AI-enabled tools. We're seeing governments around the world making significant moves towards moving their data from on-prem, servers to cloud-based systems around the world. And the result in terms of not just cost efficiency, but security, access to better analytics is really dramatic. And so I think this is going to be a significant driver of government efficiency and digital transformation in markets around the world. And then, the last thing I'll just throw in there is some of the work that's being done in small pockets of places that are really, when you think to yourself, my God, that didn't exist before, and what a game changer that is. And I'll give you an example. We have, at Google, we've created an AI center in Ghana. We were one of the first companies, I think maybe the only company, to place an AI center in West Africa. But one of the reasons we did it is we thought to ourselves, you know what, there are a series of problems that we don't think about in the United States, but if you put the capability in the region, you will get a better understanding of what are the challenges, what are the problems that the application of AI too can help address. And a great example here is the scientists that we've got doing this in Ghana have come up through the application of artificial intelligence to maps, to satellite mapping of cities in sub-Saharan Africa, where there are large segments that have not been mapped, right? So you have places like Kibera on the outside of Nairobi and so forth, where there's literally no traditional set of streets, there's no traditional coding of like where to go, but you need to know how many people are there for purposes of distribution, for instance, of medicine or relief supplies and so forth. Through the application of our AI that we're doing in partnership with governments around the region, we've now been able to create real footprints for what does that look like, exactly how many buildings are there, where are they, what are they. So it's just, if you're in the government and you formerly knew, well, we know we've got this big place, but we have no idea of like what exactly is there or how many people. This is now, technology is going to enable you to do a much better job delivering the services that you're doing. So just a few examples.
And just to add on that, because I think that that last example leads me to think of another transformational space, which is in healthcare, actually, following the pandemic, but also really looking at how communities in emerging economies are using technology, adapting technology to be able to stand up telehealth systems or telemedicine. And that is combining both the ingenuity that is on the ground, we see it in our partners in sub-Saharan Africa, with technology to use diaspora doctors speaking the language of the people in rural communities who otherwise would have no access. And being able to combine all of those elements, then to really change the nature and change the face of how healthcare is dispensed. So I do think that the combination of technology with the knowledge of people on the ground and how we can bring that together stands to make a great deal of impact.
So these are fantastic examples, and it does come back to some of the things that you've mentioned about enabling environment and policy, and you mentioned open and secure and healthy approaches. And Karan, you were talking about the different government approaches to securing data. We have a question from one of our participants, from Christian Cabanas, who's from Systems Planning and Analysis. And the question is, how are your efforts complementary or in competition with Chinese Belt and Road Initiative, especially in the Global South? Now, it's interesting because that's a major sort of global infrastructure gambit by China that is viewed as both controversial and also very welcome and needed by many communities in the Global South. And here we're talking about infrastructure as well, in some cases a different kind of infrastructure. But the approaches that governments take to whether things are open or shared, and how well they work, frankly, with the global private sector, which by its nature actually benefits from competition as well as collaboration. How do you see that playing out? Like, from your perspective, each of you has a different perspective, but TDA is part of the U.S. government that is working to both increase jobs here at home by investing in infrastructure overseas and investing in development prospects and upstream investments with the private sector. But it's also part of U.S. foreign policy, which is in this geostrategic competition.
So for us, I think it's very much a case of providing the best of what we have to offer and understanding that people have options and choices to make. And we want to make sure that we are positioning our companies in the context of our mission to make sure that our innovations, our technologies are well known so that our partners in emerging economies can choose. And we are focused on secure but open, working with trusted vendors, the very best interoperable systems, because we think that's how the sector should function. And our partners tend to think so. I think that, yes, there's always going to be price, there's always going to be cost, there are going to be a lot of factors, but I think we have an advantage. I think we have a notion of partnering. Karan has mentioned it, it's certainly how we approach it, partnering to understand our emerging economy needs and their priorities and being responsive to that. So we from a USTDA perspective, are preparing companies, well, not preparing, but enabling companies to enter the markets to compete. And we will do everything we can to make sure that there's an ecosystem that enables that. For example, we haven't talked about it yet, but procurement in infrastructure is a critical piece of infrastructure and being able to do it on a level playing field. And so one of the things that we can do to ensure fair and open competition is that when you are looking at procurement, you're not always going to the least cost, because that can actually end up being costly in terms of having to reinvest, but taking the life cycle of your investment, taking the value of your investment over time, and understanding how to calculate at best value. So we train procurement officials around the world through our global procurement initiative to take these things into account. We believe that levels the playing field and also encourages the acquisition of resilient, modern infrastructure. And so I think that there are things that we can do, yes, very cognizant of the competition, but when you're focusing on project preparation, on partnership, on creating or enabling an environment, on doing it in a whole of government approach, I think that we can both respond and proactively develop in the face of all the competition that there is out there.
Yeah. And Karan, I mean, governments, you see it as, you work in, at the interface of Google and governments around the world. Governments take different approaches. Yep. And when you're talking about things, you were talking about the subsea cables, but you're talking about infrastructure that is invested in by the company, owned, controlled by the company, and yet it's critical to these systems and issues of how they approach control of some of these pieces of infrastructure.
Yeah, I mean, look, clearly we're in a different world than existed 30, 40 years ago, where globalization was ascendant and, there was a general consensus around sort of the Washington consensus or whatever you want to call it. I think what we're seeing in the developing world today is a real battle for not just for products and infrastructure and so forth, but really for ideas. And what is the right approach to take to development and to the relationship between governments and data and governments and regulation. Which is why when the work that TDA has done to actually inform and help governments understand the critical importance of some basic premises that are so critical to their connection to these developing economies, connection into the global economy. Things like free flow of data into and out of the countries. Those are such core principles to allow and enable companies like Google, Western companies generally, to be able to operate, and for those governments to be connected into the global economy. There is a very different model out there, and which is why it is so critical that the U.S. government continue, including not just through the great work of agencies like TDA, but on the trade policy front. And frankly, there's been a bit of uncertainty as to where the U.S. is going to go on this front. And look, a company like Google, we're going to be able to figure it out. We'll make our way through the compliance requirements and so forth. But for many, many other companies around the world that are smaller than us, the evolution of policy in these countries in ways that are much more restrictive, that are more discriminatory, is really going to be a showstopper. And that means you're not going to have this sort of array of products and the ecosystem that it builds. So it is a very important moment in time for development, and I think for the different models of development that are being sort of debated out there.
Can I just add,
Yes, and then I'm going to also see if there are questions from the crowd. Yeah.
Just very quickly on that point too, that as what is important is that as those questions of policy and framework continue to be worked through, we can continue to move forward with projects, with activities that reinforce the openness and the kinds of infrastructure that we want to see. And I think it's really important to us to do it in concert with countries that are very knowledgeable in regions. I'll go back to the Indo-Pacific, for example, where connecting to what Kran was mentioning with respect to subsea cables, we're working with Tuvalu, the island of Tuvalu, for the first time in laying a cable that is going to provide connectivity, again, secure and trusted, to over 14 islands in the region. But we're doing that in concert with Australia and Japan, who are interested in financing. Our State Department spent over a year training the people in Tuvalu with respect to regulation, policy, etc. So there is a constellation out there, I think, which is in part an answer to making sure that our vision of open, trusted systems and networks can be stood up.
Thank you so much. Let me turn. We have a question here from this gentleman. Please identify yourself. Yeah.
Sure. My name is Andrew Mack. I'm the CEO of Agrimobile. We're a data company that connects small farming communities, small farms, with large supply chains around the world. And I'm a big fan of the agency, big fan of Google. We just launched a program in Colombia 2 weeks ago. Melinda was there speaking. It was fantastic, with a goal of mapping 45,000 farmers and expanding that. So a couple of things. All of what you're saying sounds musical to my ears. The big two things that I haven't heard. Number one is anything about ag, because it's the largest employer still on earth. And the second thing is about how we might take people at the edge and wrap them into the policy conversation. They're newer to the internet, they're newer to access to digitization, and yet they're the biggest beneficiaries in some meaningful ways. I know Google is at the forefront of this. Love to know what your thoughts are and how we can mobilize them as as a supporter of open policies toward digitization to get some of the technologies like ours out to more places.
That's great.
Thanks.
Sorry, could I get the first half of your question? You said what is the biggest employer?
Agriculture.
Sorry, got it.
Thank you for the question. I don't know if either one of you wants to take a stab at that. I mean, I will say, I'd like to dovetail with that to bring it back to the fact that, Enno, you're about to also go to COP, and some of that stuff connects back in very much to sustainable ag issues, but please go ahead.
I mean, I'm happy to take on on both, comment briefly. First of all, I completely agree with you. I think the agricultural sector is one that stands to be most benefited by some of these technological improvements, particularly in the developing world and the emerging markets, where it's still, painful to see how undeveloped they are from a technology standpoint. But I was talking to somebody the other day who was describing to me the application. This is one of the major U.S. ag-related companies, and how now through the application of artificial intelligence with a simple camera, you can go through fields and detect weeds from non-weeds and target pesticide particularly at the weeds versus the non-weeds, and that in so doing you're going to increase yields by some substantial percentage. I mean, it's just, think about the application of that technology much more broadly, and it is now, ubiquitous. You can move technology. So it's a super exciting thing. I'm very excited by the space you're working in, and looking forward to continuing to work together on that. The broader question about how do you get people who are at the edge, as you put it, more invested, more involved, really is one of the great challenges on technology policy. It's been one of the challenges around globalization writ large. The beneficiaries often are distant and don't feel empowered to be part of the dialogue, and as a result, you often have discussions happening dominated by a very small handful of voices that don't reflect that the greater society that is impacted. You would hope that technology itself furnishes part of the answer to that. Being able to bring people online, being able to bring their voices into the policy debates, and one of the most wonderful tools that I've seen for doing this is YouTube. We find that the creator economy, which today pretty much anybody with a mobile phone can become a self-employed business and is able to bring their voices to bear. I've recently, at the APEC Summit, we had a bunch of these creators showing up and engaging with policymakers around how they've set up their business and what it means to be a small business doing business online. And yet there are millions of these people whose interests heretofore haven't really been thought about, but they are a huge multi-billion-dollar industry. So I put my hope and faith in technology to actually be part of the solution to the very important challenge that you raised.
I'll just add, and nice to see you again. It's been a while. These are very, very important questions from our perspective. We are focused on building the infrastructure and the capability of bringing people online. I think that policy piece is not within our focus, given our mission, but that it is a critical piece that I know through initiatives like the Digital Transformation with Africa, where there's a particular cone on human capital development and enabling environment, that I think that's where, and across other agencies like USAID and the Foreign Agricultural Service, there may be some engagement on that, because it is important. Yes, we can provide the wherewithal for people to come online, but then how do you engage, I think, is a separate and equally important question. The agribusiness sector has been a challenging one for us, and we have a few projects in our portfolio. It's not a priority sector, but that's largely because we take our guide from industry in terms of where the possibilities are for exports, for development. And over the years, it's been tough, but I think that you make an interesting point with respect to technology and what technology can do. So it's important, and we remain flexible to look at projects that can fit our criteria and make a difference in that sense. I think with respect to the climate piece, we have been able to identify projects over time and I think of a project in Kenya where we're working to support the development of pyrethrum, which is organic fertilizer, basically. So support that kind of project that can have impact, reduce, danger to the impact to the climate, to the environment in a negative way, but yet build. In essence, a new business. I mean, it was brought back to life in Kenya and provide jobs in the region as well.
I think it's actually quite an interesting question because, as the questioner said, it is still one of the biggest industries, and yet there will be a lot of conversation at COP around this nexus of digital transformation issues and sector X, Y, or Z. I mean, I was thinking about you at the beginning. You were just talking about healthcare, and you were talking about climate, and you were talking about digitalization. But really, digitalization fuses into all of them.
Absolutely.
When I think about it, of helping different countries' healthcare systems move to the cloud, as you were describing, moving systems to the cloud, or helping, smallholder agriculturalists to have better climate information, especially in a world where today, roughly half of the world is water insecure for some period of every year. Having better climate information, which we often take for granted, but is really not something to take for granted around the world, can make a really practical difference. And that needs to be layered on a digital infrastructure. It needs to be layered, it can be layered on a system where internet exists because of subsea cables, where broadband exists because of telecom investments, where there are ways to identify people through different mapping systems and their needs, and an interface between them openly, between them and the governments that are trying to provide them with services. So I think there's a lot of potential there. This conversation is fascinating to me. When it comes back to the security questions, when we were talking about competition was about leveling the playing field and discriminatory practices maybe with regard to different types of businesses. But there's a more underlying concern, or a different concern as well, simply with regard to cybersecurity. And one of our viewers who's joining us from the Boeing company, Houston Holdren, asked this question. That's essentially, how are we maintaining cybersecurity and information security of these infrastructures, and thinking about that when the U.S. has adversaries around the world, and lots of countries have adversaries. How do we think about that side of security with regard to these investments? And do any of your activities sort of brush up against these issues? I imagine in the case of Google. I don't know in the case of TDA, but.
I will just quickly say that we actually have programs that are focused on addressing with our partners cybersecurity and the best practices to integrate into projects with respect to security. So if we're doing, and again, recall that we're focused on planning and preparation. So you can, in the early assessments, as you're looking at feasibility, as you're providing technical assistance, as you're piloting, you can build in the best in class of what we should be thinking about to secure the system. So in the project preparation side, we would include that element of what we're planning to build. And then bringing delegations over through our reverse trade missions, we focus, and we have a number now focused on cybersecurity so that we can exchange ideas, bring people into contact with our regulators, our policy makers, our industry that is dealing with these issues, to share best practices as they look to procure infrastructure in this space. But I know you'll have more of the
Well,
practical.
I mean, it won't surprise you to know that cybersecurity is, at the tip top of our sets of focuses and concerns around the world. I mean, we're operating a platform, multiple platforms, multiple services with more than 1 billion users. The scale of the exposure and the consequences of things going wrong is enormous, and so for us, this is fundamental. And we invest billions of dollars a year to make sure that our users remain safe. And in fact, from one of the core parts of our cloud business is basically taking the set of cybersecurity tools that we have developed to protect our own systems, our own sort of consumer-focused systems, and be able to expand them more broadly to governments, to other sets of clients, corporate clients out there. And so, I will just tell you, when I meet with officials from emerging markets, developing countries, this is almost always in their sets of questions and requests, which is, we are worried about cybersecurity. And I think they recognize, I mean, there have been obviously some highly publicized examples of developing country governments that have been attacked, and recognizing that there are vulnerabilities there and that the consequences are really profound. So I think this is going to be a core differentiator, and I think it's a space where working again in partnership with the U.S. government and with others, prioritizing this as a condition, prioritizing this as a area that gets funded and it gets emphasized, I think is going to be really important.
Well, this conversation is fascinating, could continue, but we're at time. I do want to thank you for addressing both the underlying sort of concerns of developing countries and investors and lots of people who are looking at the space, but also laying out the vision for what positive engagement with digital transformation can look like. I think your examples on education, on Google Translate, and inclusion and accessibility, on connectivity, your examples on the investments in project preparation, they really help inform those of us who are trying to sort of wrap our heads around what is digital public infrastructure? What is digital transformation? How does it actually connect to the lives and concerns of people all across developing countries to make their lives better and their governments, enable their governments to provide better services and enable their economies to function better. So thank you, Karan Bhatia, thank you, Anna Ebong, for joining us for today's discussion, and thank you for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.